Hi and welcome back to my channel. Today we're gonna keep watching the Napoleonic War series from Epic History TV. And this is Napoleon's retreat from Moscow. So we saw Napoleon on the last episode begin to enter into Moscow and it began to burn. Which is not that good for him. It's probably the Russians that started to burn Moscow, right? Okay, original videos down below. Let's go. Peace lies in Moscow. Okay.
Russia, 1812.
Wow.
Napoleon invades his former ally with the largest army Europe has ever seen.
Yep.
But for the French Emperor, the decisive blow remains frustratingly beyond reach.
Yep.
Russia's resilience is unlike anything he's ever encountered. And as winter closes in, his army begins the most infamous retreat in history.
Yep. Very interesting.
The 15th of September, 1812. 83 days after invading Russia, a week after his costly victory at Borodino, Napoleon entered Moscow. He expected to be greeted by dignitaries, formally offering the city's surrender. Instead, he discovered that 90% of Moscow's inhabitants had fled.
Wow.
A fire had started the previous night and was blamed on drunken soldiers. But over the next 48 hours, fires continued to break out across Moscow until most of the city was ablaze.
Wow. That's a sight
Count
to see.
Fyodor Rostopchin, the city's governor, had ordered that Moscow be destroyed rather than allowed to fall into enemy hands.
Wow.
And now fires were being started deliberately by Russian criminals, freed from jail and acting on police orders.
Wow.
French soldiers rounded up and shot any they could catch.
Wow. It sounds like Spain all over again. And it's funny that criminals follow police order. That's pretty funny.
But the inferno was impossible to contain. In 4 days, 2/3 of Moscow was destroyed.
Wow. What?
With the fires finally under control, Napoleon's soldiers turned their attention to systematically looting the ruined city. While from his new quarters in the Kremlin, Napoleon sent a letter to Emperor Alexander in St. Petersburg, inviting him to make peace and end the war. He received no reply.
Wow.
Napoleon waited, confident that Alexander would eventually negotiate. But as the days passed, he grew increasingly uneasy.
Again, we have to think, what is Napoleon gonna do? It's 6th of October, right? Soon is winter. Alexander hasn't responded. What will Napoleon do? Will he retreat to like Smolensk? Will he go and advance to St. Petersburg? Like, what is he gonna do? This is a very tricky situation Napoleon has found himself in, right? And he said peace lies in Moscow? Yeah, I don't think so.
Cossack raids were disrupting his vital communications with Paris, as well as the arrival of supplies. While the steady attrition of French forces and Russian reinforcements meant Napoleon was outnumbered for the first time in the campaign.
Makes
Rumors
sense.
also reached him that his reluctant allies, Prussia and Austria, were in secret talks with his enemies. Napoleon had proposed that the army winter in Moscow, but that now looked too dangerous. Reluctantly, he accepted that the army would have to move back to Smolensk to find safe winter quarters.
But it's the 11th of October.
Napoleon knew how severe Russian winters could be, but continued to put off his departure, reassured by fine October weather, and hoping that at the last minute there might be a message from Alexander offering peace.
But what? Sure, if he offers peace, then okay, then it was for something. But if he doesn't offer peace and doesn't reply, and he's still waiting for it, for the reply, I can understand, because if Napoleon retreats to Smolensk and the Russian gain Moscow again, albeit it's destroyed, right? But that would seem like a defeat on Napoleon, and the Russians wouldn't surrender, right? Probably it's the thinking that Russia had, that Napoleon had, right? Napoleon is just pushing, like he's kicking the can down the road, right? All right, let's see what's gonna do.
It never came.
Yeah, okay.
On the 13th of October, the first light snow fell.
Uh-oh.
5 days later, Kutuzov launched a surprise attack on Murat's advance guard at Vinkovo and defeated it.
Oof.
Napoleon, stung into action, gave the order for the army to leave Moscow the next day.
Okay. Now is the moment my campaign begins, Emperor Alexander. Okay.
100,000 men of the Grande Armée left Moscow in a column 10 miles long, with an estimated 40,000 carriages and carts.
Wow.
There were women and children too, army wives and the vivandières, the women who cooked for the soldiers, as well as some civilians.
Yikes.
Every wagon and pack was stuffed with as much food and loot as possible.
Nice.
As he set off, Sergeant Bourgogne of the Imperial Guard made an inventory of his pack.
Okay.
It contained several pounds of sugar, some rice, some biscuit, half a bottle of liqueur, a woman's Chinese silk dress embroidered in gold and silver, several gold and silver ornaments, amongst them a piece of the cross of Ivan the Great. Besides these, I had my uniform, a woman's large riding cloak, 2 silver pictures in relief, 12 inches long and 8 high, all in the finest workmanship. Also several lockets, and a Russian prince's spittoon set with precious stones.
Wow.
I wore over my shirt a yellow silk waistcoat, which I had made myself out of a woman's skirt. Over that, a large cape lined with ermine, and a large pouch hung at my side by a silver cord. This was full of various things, amongst them a crucifix in gold and silver, and a little Chinese porcelain vase. Then there were my firearms, powder flask, and 60 cartridges in the box.
Wow, I mean, you can see a lot of Chinese things, right? It's pretty cool, because trade with Russia, that makes sense. Neighbors. I mean, what remarkable things he has with him. I don't know if he survives the retreat, but piece of the cross of Ivan the Great. I mean, that's pretty cool to have, but okay. I mean, you're carrying all these precious stones and all these expensive, supposedly expensive things. But food, maybe? I don't know, right? Maybe more cartridges or more powder. But okay. Pretty interesting stuff.
This heavily encumbered army did not yet realize it was in a race against time.
Yeah.
The Russians were beginning to move against the flanks of Napoleon's 550-mile-deep salient.
Wow.
That very day, Wittgenstein's army was driving back Marshal Saint-Cyr's outnumbered force at Polotsk.
Yeah. I mean, let's just think about this. It took Napoleon sort of 3 months to get to Moscow, right? With, what was it, like 600,000 men? Now Napoleon only has 100,000 men, and he's going to retreat. Maybe it's going to be faster because he has less men, but he has more baggages of loot, right? And civilians and all that, right? And his enemies on his flanks are stronger than his army corps at his flank. So, okay.
And drawing Victor's 9th Corps west to support them. In the south, Admiral Chichagov's advance had Schwarzenberg's Austrian Corps falling back to cover Warsaw. The corridor was closing.
Yep.
And then there was the weather. though Napoleon was confident his army could reach winter quarters in Smolensk in 20 days, well before the more extreme temperatures were due to hit.
Okay. Average temperature,
Napoleon planned to withdraw via Kaluga, through unspoilt country where the army could forage for supplies.
That makes sense, right? Not going the exact same route. That's a good thing if you want to move fast, like Napoleon wants to do. Move fast, not with the slow baggage train, although he has it with him as well, but to find food and all that. But one thing, when you're in the military, do you really want to take a different route than you did to get to the destination? Which route do you know there's no enemy? Probably no enemy because you have defeated them. It's probably via Smolensk to Vyazma, right? That road where the 8th Corps is, right? Because you've gone that road, you know that road, right? If he goes through Kaluga, he doesn't know that road, he doesn't know where the enemy is there, he doesn't know the terrain there. He could have scouts, but still he doesn't know, he can't see it with his eyes. Maybe there's more food by the road with Kaluga, but still, a military defeat here, it's just disastrous, right? Okay.
But Kutuzov sent General Dokhturov's 6th Corps to block the road at Maloyaroslavets.
Wow.
In fierce
Look
fighting,
at this.
Italian troops of Eugene's 4th Corps drove the Russians out of the town.
Wow.
It was a hard-won victory, reminiscent of the fighting at Borodino.
So a slaughter then. Nice.
Kutuzov now stood between Napoleon and Kaluga.
Yep.
Napoleon now took the unusual step of conferring with his marshals. And after discussing various options, he decided that rather than seek another major battle, they would retreat the way they'd come.
Uh-oh.
Along the Smolensk road.
Okay. But the problem here, you're almost halfway through. I understand he doesn't want to take the battle, but I thought the whole point was to defeat Kutuzov. But it's winter soon. Snow already, right? Napoleon doesn't have the men, and it's bad weather, so I can understand. But it's you're retreating up to Moscow, sort of, and then going down again to... okay, let's
Napoleon had hoped to avoid this route, as it meant marching back through country already stripped bare of supplies.
Exactly.
The day after the fighting at Maloyaroslavets, Napoleon was nearly captured by a group of Cossacks.
Wow.
And saved only by General Rapp's charge at the head of his escort.
Wow.
After this close shave, Napoleon had a phial of poison made up, which he carried around his neck in case of capture.
I mean, that's smart. Those who were too weak to carry their weapons or knapsacks threw them away, and all looked like a crowd of gypsies. Wow. Wow. I mean, that just describes the conditions of maybe not the whole army or all the corps, but a lot of them a lot of individual soldiers in the corps, right? But I mean, I understand they want to be quicker on their feet and not carry heavy stuff, but you're retreating, and it's gonna be winter when you are near Poland or whatever. It's still cold in Poland as well, so okay. Maybe
Napoleon's
a little foreshadowing.
army set off on its new course, shadowed at a respectful distance by Kutuzov's army to the south. They passed the old battlefield of Borodino, a grisly, unnerving sight, where crows pecked at half-buried corpses.
Wow.
Relentless marching quickly began to tire out men and horses.
Makes sense.
A few days later, the temperature fell below freezing.
Uh-oh.
The army's overworked, starving horses died en masse.
Yeah.
Discipline began to break down, as some drivers simply dumped the sick and wounded by the roadside to try to ensure their own survival.
Yeah.
As the French column became increasingly strung out, General Miloradovich, commanding Kutuzov's advance guard, fell on Davout's rear guard outside Vyazma. For a few hours, Davout's first corps was cut off,
Wow.
until Eugène and Ney came to his rescue.
Okay.
The battle ended with street fighting in Vyazma,
Wow.
as the French hastily evacuated the burning town.
Yeah, these battles are just slaughters. Wow.
For the soldiers of the Grande Armée, so unaccustomed to retreats and routes,
Yep.
Vyazma was an alarming, demoralizing blow.
Yep. The road was strewed with the dead. Our sufferings exceeded imagination. General Rapp. Okay, it's Napoleon's aide-de-camp. Okay.
On the 4th of November, it began to snow heavily.
Yep.
The next night, temperatures plummeted to minus 20 degrees centigrade. Few men or women had proper winter clothing
Yep.
or access to shelter.
And why? Because they went in spring, I believe, right? So why would we need this? It's not going to take this long. We're just going to go in Russia and defeat Russia. Probably was the thinking, I guess, for this. And they probably took away their winter clothing, knapsacks, like the guy said, right? So they're probably faster on their feet and can move more quickly, and yeah. Yeah. This is
Many
a
froze
disaster.
to death overnight. The next morning, wagons and guns were abandoned. Many soldiers sought to save themselves, ignoring officers, stealing horses and food,
Yep.
and leaving the column to scour the countryside for supplies.
That's not a good idea.
Many of these foragers were found by the Cossacks. Some cut down or lanced,
Yep.
others robbed of every possession and left to freeze.
Yep.
In a few cases, they were handed over to peasants, eager for retribution against the foreign invaders who had plundered all they owned.
Makes sense.
As the army struggled on towards Smolensk through blizzards, Napoleon ordered Eugène's 4th Corps to strike out for Vitebsk, where there were large French supply depots.
Oh, okay.
But Vitebsk had already fallen to the Russians.
Uh-oh.
4th Corps was too weak to fight its way through, and rejoined the army, minus its artillery and most of its baggage.
Wow.
A colonel who saw 4th Corps at this stage described men without shoes, almost without clothes, exhausted and famished, sitting on their packs, sleeping on their knees, and only rousing themselves out of this stupor to grill slices of horse meat
Yep.
or melt bits of ice.
Yep.
Just 3 weeks after leaving Moscow, a third of the army was dead or captured. About half the rest formed a growing army of stragglers, men without units, prepared to fight only to survive.
Wow. This is a disaster.
Napoleon reached Smolensk on the 9th of November. The first troops into town ransacked the supply depots, leaving nothing for those who followed, including Ney's rearguard, which arrived 6 days later.
Wow.
Napoleon had hoped to make Smolensk his winter base, but the state of the army and lack of supplies meant the retreat had to continue.
Yep. He should have done this earlier. He should have gone to Smolensk earlier, right? But again, hindsight's 2020. But yeah. Okay.
But the 5 days he spent there gave Kutuzov time to circle ahead and prepare an ambush.
Yep.
When the French retreat resumed, he struck 30 miles west of Smolensk at Krasny. In 3 days of desperate fighting through knee-deep snow, Napoleon used his Imperial Guard to hold open the road, as Eugène and Davout's corps fought their way through the ambush with heavy losses.
Wow.
2 regiments of the Young Guard were ordered to make a sacrificial counterattack to keep the Russians at bay, and were virtually annihilated.
I mean, imagine being there. The Young Guard as well, right? They're just there. They're just there to open the road and they're just standing there, just sacrificing themselves. I mean, it's amazing. But again though, it looks still if a lesser general was in charge of this army or corps, I think they would have soundly been defeated and surrounded and virtually destroyed or captured, right? If it was another general, but it's still Napoleon, so it looks like, I mean, they're all dying en masse, but they're still surviving and actually not being completely destroyed by the battles, but it's heroic sacrifices from the young guard and from all the corps that on the vanguard. But okay.
Kutuzov held back many of his troops and was blamed for not trying to destroy Napoleon's army when he had the chance.
Okay.
It's possible he was concerned at the number of raw conscripts in his own army,
Yeah.
also suffering terribly in the freezing conditions.
Exactly, because in this Russian campaign, we just see through Napoleon's point of view, sort of, right? We don't see the casualties on these battles and in these weather conditions, right, on the Russian side. And they have a lot of conscripts, although they have more numbers, but they have more conscripts. Napoleon also have conscripts, but they've at least been to war or some battles, right, on this Russian campaign, and maybe before even, right, like the young guard, right? But I mean, it makes sense that Kutuzov just doesn't go into there, because then he can have a major defeat and then Napoleon is basically safe. But okay. All the Cossacks and the Russians in the world shall not prevent me from rejoining the army. Marshal Ney. Okay, what's happening?
Not every French corps broke through at Krasny.
Oh, okay.
Marshal Ney and his 6,000-strong rearguard arrived on the 18th of November to find the road blocked by 60,000 Russian troops.
Wow, he's
but no sign
surrounded.
of the promised support from Davout's First Corps. Ney's men hurled themselves against the Russian lines with desperate courage, but were mown down.
Wow.
Rejecting several invitations to surrender, Ney led the survivors in a daring night crossing of the Dnieper River.
Wow.
Then across 45 miles of open country under constant attack from Platov's Cossacks to reach Orsha.
Wow.
By the time Ney rejoined the army, his rearguard was down to just 800 fighting men.
Oh my.
A column of several thousand stragglers.
Wow.
The army regarded his escape as a miracle.
Yep.
And when Napoleon heard of it, he immediately dubbed Marshal Ney the bravest of the brave.
Wow. I mean, that's cool. That's amazing. I mean, again, a lesser general or marshal would probably been surrounded and destroyed or captured. So, credit to Marshal Ney here as well. But they got thousands of stragglers, right? As well, and 800 fighting forces. Wow. That's devastating. This is beginning to be very serious. Oh, really?
Napoleon had escaped one trap, but now 3 Russian armies were closing in from different directions and outnumbered him nearly 3 to 1.
Yep.
From the east, Kutuzov's main army with 65,000 men. From the north, Wittgenstein with 30,000, steadily driving back Marshal Victor's 9th Corps. And from the south, Admiral Chichagov's army of Moldavia with 34,000, having detached General Osten-Sacken with 30,000 to prevent Schwarzenberg's Austrians and Renier's Saxon Corps marching to Napoleon's aid.
Okay. This
Napoleon
looks pretty bad.
was heading for Minsk, a major French supply base with vast stores of the food, clothing, shoes and ammunition that his army so desperately needed.
But I mean, the last time he was going to a food storage, right, it got captured by the Russians. So maybe Minsk is gonna get captured again? Let's see.
But on the 21st of November, disastrous news arrived.
Yeah.
Minsk had fallen to Chichagov. He'd then marched on Borisov, driven out the Polish garrison, and captured its bridge over the Berezina River.
Wow.
By rights, the Berezina ought to have frozen solid by now,
Yep.
so Napoleon could have crossed anywhere. But a sudden thaw had turned the river into a torrent of ice and freezing water.
Wow.
Napoleon was at least joined by the hard-fighting Marshal Oudinot and his Second Corps,
Okay.
which hadn't suffered as badly as the main column on its retreat from Polotsk. Oudinot launched an immediate counterattack on Borisov and retook the town, but couldn't stop the Russians burning the bridge.
Okay.
With no other bridge for miles in either direction, it seemed Napoleon's exhausted army was finally doomed.
Yeah, looks like it.
But there was one sliver of hope. Polish cavalry had found a ford across the river near the village of Studienka.
Okay.
Napoleon issued a flurry of orders. Second Corps was to fake preparations for a river crossing south of Borisov. Victor's 9th Corps, arriving from the north, was to form a rear guard east of Studienka to hold the Russians at bay.
Okay. Again though, look at this. A lesser general of this entire army would not have done this, or at least they would have probably done the first thing at south of Borisov, right? Just a bridge there and an attack, right? This is still Napoleon. He's still a genius, military genius, so I have to give him credit. Although Russia was a very big mistake, you can still see Napoleon's genius here, right?
While engineers worked as quickly as possible to build pontoon bridges across the river.
Yeah, in the water.
And win Napoleon's army a fighting chance of escape.
Yeah. Our situation is unparalleled. If Napoleon extricates himself today, he must have the devil in him. Marshal Ney to General Rapp.
On the afternoon of the 25th of November, General Eblé's Dutch engineers began building two 300-foot pontoon bridges across the Berezina
River. The Dutch know how to build bridges.
They worked day and night, sometimes chest deep in freezing water.
Wow.
And completed both bridges in less than 24 hours.
Yeah, that's pneumonia.
Few of the engineers survived the ordeal.
Yeah.
Chichagov had been totally fooled by the diversion south of Borisov.
Okay.
And was moving his troops south to face it, allowing Napoleon's army to begin crossing its rickety bridges virtually unopposed. Oudinot's Second Corps led the way to secure a bridgehead,
Strongest.
followed the next day by the remnants of the main army.
Okay.
Priority was given to formed troops, still able to fight. For the time being, the army's vast crowd of stragglers remained on the far bank.
Look at this. Wow. I mean, people are just swimming across or going across in the freezing water. Wow. I mean, look at this. Jesus. Wow. Disaster. Although Napoleon's genius.
By the time Chichagov realized his mistake and began moving north, Napoleon had troops in place to defend the crossing.
Exactly, good. But he's being squeezed. He has the Russians coming from the east and the south. He has protected his south flank. He has also protected his eastern flank, but still, all the stragglers, tens of thousands of stragglers. I mean, yeah. This is probably going to be a disaster, but okay.
On the east bank, General Partonneux's 12th Division, 4,000 relatively fresh troops from Victor's 9th Corps, formed the rear guard.
Okay, they're surrounded.
As Platov's Cossacks approached from the east, the vanguard of Kutuzov's main army, Partonneux tried to rejoin 9th Corps.
Nah.
But caught in a swirling blizzard, with visibility down to 50 meters, he marched straight into Wittgenstein's army.
Oh my.
His entire division was killed or captured.
Wow. Exactly that is what probably would have happened if a lesser general was leading this army before they crossed the river, right? They were just walked in or being surrounded and not doing these skillful tactical decisions, right? They were just, oh, it's a battle, and then they lost, right? A lesser general, but not Napoleon.
The next
or Ney.
morning, Chichagov and Wittgenstein launched coordinated attacks on both sides of the river.
Makes sense. Pressure.
There was desperate fighting on the west bank, where Marshal Oudinot was, yet again, seriously wounded.
Wow.
But his Swiss infantry held the line.
Nice.
Until General Doumerc's cuirassiers, the army's last heavy cavalry, charged and routed the Russians.
Wow. I mean, you see in these battles, small skirmishes and battles, you see troops from Italy being victorious for Napoleon. You see troops from Saxony trying to help him. Austria, but meh. You see Polish, you see Swiss, Dutch engineers. I mean, it's pretty cool.
At great cost, Polish and German troops of Victor's rearguard held off the Russians until dark.
Yeah, but it also, about this, a lot of different nationalities in his army also shows that Napoleon can actually coordinate with different nationalities in his army. Although it looks like it on paper, right? And in practice as well, it looks like something that the coalition armies maybe have to figure out, right? Like at Austerlitz, right? But okay.
Then pulled back across the bridges.
Yeah, but the stragglers.
For 2 nights, officers had been trying to get the vast camp of stragglers to cross the bridges when they weren't being used. But with temperatures reaching -30 centigrade, they'd preferred to stay put, huddled around their fires. At dawn on the 29th, with the army leaving and the Russians approaching, thousands of stragglers surged in panic towards the bridges.
Oh my.
Dozens were crushed underfoot.
Yeah.
Others fell or were pushed into the water.
Wow.
Or tried to swim.
Wow.
Which was certain death.
Yeah.
When French engineers burned the bridges at 9 a.m., thousands were cut off and left to the mercy of the advancing Cossacks.
Yeah.
Some became prisoners. Others were simply put out of their misery.
I mean, that's just a massacre, really. I mean, they're not a fighting force, although they probably have weapons. A lot of them are probably they're not civilians, because a lot of them are military, or at least formerly military men, right? Probably some women and children there as well. I mean, that's a massacre, right? Wow. Yeah, what appalling misery. What a multitude have perished in this retreat. Yep. Duke of Hesse.
Since the retreat began 43 days earlier, the Grande Armée had marched nearly 500 miles, under constant attack, starved, exhausted, and for the last 23 days, in lethal sub-zero temperatures, without proper clothing or shelter. In that time, the fighting strength of the Grande Armée had been reduced from around 124,000 men to 20,000.
Oh my.
With as many stragglers still following the army.
Yeah.
As the retreat continued to Vilna, the weather turned even worse, the temperatures falling to -37 degrees centigrade.
Wow.
The Russian armies at least now held back, leaving the winter, Cossacks and Russian peasants to finish off the invaders.
Makes sense.
On the 5th of December, Napoleon left the army, traveling incognito across Europe at breakneck speed.
That's pretty cool.
And reaching Paris in just 13 days.
Wow. Huh.
Naturally, English satirists capitalized on Napoleon seeming to abandon his defeated army. And many soldiers did regard it as an act of betrayal.
Yeah, sure.
But his generals supported his decision to leave.
Okay.
There'd already been one attempted coup against Napoleon in Paris.
Okay, that makes
And
sense.
there was much work to be done to rebuild the army and reassure France's allies.
Yeah. Although it's a risk though, because Napoleon can lose all his generals here in Russia and in Poland, right? So it's a very big risk. But okay.
On the 9th of December, 51 days after the retreat began, around 20,000 ragged survivors of the Grande Armée began crossing the Niemen River back into friendly Polish territory.
Okay.
According to legend, Marshal Ney was the last man across.
Wow. That's pretty cool. Second and third corps are no more than a memory. The latter numbers only 60 men. Wow.
Napoleon's invasion of Russia had proved to be one of the greatest military disasters in history. He had made fatal miscalculations about geography, logistics, and above all, Russia's political and strategic response to his invasion.
Yeah. It's like the Spaniards and the Portuguese.
These blunders cost his empire around 500,000 men.
Oh my.
As well as 250,000 horses.
Wow.
And 1,000 cannon.
Wow.
Put another way, of every 12 men who marched into Russia with the Grande Armée,
Yeah.
one was killed in action or died of wounds.
Yeah.
2 were taken prisoner, one of whom died in captivity.
Wow.
7 died from disease or the effects of climate.
Which makes sense.
Just 2 returned alive.
Wow. Imagine being those 2 returned alive. Or the one prisoner that survives. And then maybe hearing from other prisoners that, oh, Napoleon is safe or something like that. Or oh, these many people died. But I mean, 7 killed by disease or climate, that's very common. I mean, that's the most common way people died in war. And in general, in peace as well. So, nothing new, but it still shows the gravity of the situation.
Contrary to myth, many more soldiers had died in the summer advance from heat, typhus and dysentery than were lost in the winter retreat.
I mean, we saw that, he came in with nearly 600,000 men and left with 95,000 men. But when he was at Moscow, he had like 100,000 men, and then on his flanks he maybe had like 100,000 as well. So, I mean, he lost them on the way into Russia than on the way out. But it was more dramatic on the way out.
Russian military casualties were estimated at 150,000.
Wow.
And a huge but unknown number of civilian deaths.
Yeah.
The Russian campaign was a catastrophe for Napoleon. Not just in lost troops and resources, but in damage to prestige and reputation.
Yep.
That winter, all his enemies sensed weakness.
Yep.
And prepared to join forces against him.
That makes sense.
But the Emperor wasn't going down without a fight.
No, he's still Napoleon.
Back in Paris, he admitted to his ministers, "Fortune has dazzled me, gentlemen. I've let it lead me astray.
Yep.
Instead of following my plan, I went to Moscow.
Yep.
I thought I'd make peace there. I stayed too long. I've made a grave mistake, but I'll have the means to repair it."
Wow. That's an epic speech. Or not speech, but quote. I mean, we'll see if Napoleon has the means to repair this fault. It looks like the Austrians and Prussians and Swedes are back into the fight against Napoleon with the Spaniards, Portuguese, Russia, and Britain. It's going to be very interesting. This was a very, very, very tumultuous retreat, right? I'll see you in the next video. Bye.